Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 17 of the Anxious Pastor Podcast. If you're new with us today, my name is Aaron Lee. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm a pastor out of Louisville, Kentucky, but I'm a guy who, who you'll learn pretty quickly is a hot mess and really just spends a lot of time on the struggle bus. But you know what? That's okay. And that's what this podcast is all about, that many of us deal with things in this life that we're tied to, that we're tethered to. And you know what? We don't talk about those things enough. And so when we can be real and live authentically, then more freedom can come, or freedom can come into our lives because of what we've brought to the light. And we do that not alone, but together. And so that's what this podcast is all about. And my goal in every episode is to be real and it's to be authentic. And so my hope is that as we talk about real life topics, that you feel like you're heard and that you're understood and that you have some practical things that will help you. And so again, that's what this podcast is all about. And so again, if you're new, hit the subscribe button, share it with friends and family, get the word out about the podcast. We really just want to help as many people as we can. In today's episode, we are talking about a pretty heavy topic. It's something that me and my family have been walking through in the past month or so, and it's grief. We've been dealing with the loss of a family member, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But also some of the things that come along with grief, but not just grief, not limited to grief. I want you to understand that even though I'm talking about grief, the things that come out of it are things that come out of many situations that we all deal with, whether it just be the loss of a job or financial troubles or whatever. But it's high stress. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about emotional eating in particular. I wanted to get real specific because those are the things that I have been dealing with over the past month. And I want to talk real about that. I want to talk about how that's been a struggle for me. And then we're going to talk about some practical things, some maybe disciplines that we can put in place to help us walk through these struggles. But all that being said, it's important for us to be real, to live authentic. So let's get trying. So like I said, this is episode 17 of the Anxious Pastor Podcast, and we're talking about grief, stress, and emotional eating. And then we're going to talk about how to be disciplined in those times where we're struggling. And this is not limited to just when you've lost a family member or something like that. This is everyday life. We all have those things that are throwing us off, and we need to have some discipline in our lives, some practical things that will help us. And so that's what we're talking about in this episode. I've just got to be real with you guys for a moment. This has been a really, really challenging season. And I'm sure for most of you and myself, it's been like something I've never experienced in my life. While on top of that, dealing with things that I haven't dealt with in my life, like losing someone close to our family. And so I have to be honest that my anxiety has been really controlling me in a lot of ways. And I want to point out something very important, that I don't think our anxiety is always this enemy. And I know many of you are like, what? But think about it for a second. I think that we've developed some defense mechanisms, and I think that anxiety is one of those defenses. And that being said, I think it comes out to try to protect us, but it does a really bad job and just damages everything in the process. The point is that there's something that's causing us to feel threatened or like we're in pain. And so that's why we need to talk about these things, is to get past the anxiety, to see what it is that's drawing us to this place where this anxiety is coming out. And so I just want you to know, like, I'm struggling. I am not a person that every single day is perfect for me. And that was part of the reason why I started this podcast, was I wanted people to know that every day's a battle and we have to kind of keep fighting it. And it's okay to do that. But you know what? I'm tired of being in quarantine. Like, while I'm an introvert, I love being by myself. at the same time, I am tired of being stuck in one place and not being able to have the freedom to go and watch a movie with friends or go to a restaurant and meet someone and just have real discipleship conversations or be in church with the community of believers that I get to be a part of. You know, and from that I'm struggling because I get stuck in my house. There's food constantly in my house at this current season of life. And you know what? I binge eat, and that's because of my emotions, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Something else that when we're stuck inside our homes or just locked down, we don't feel like we have a purpose. I know I don't. Man, that's something I'm wrestling with so much. I just feel like what am I doing? I can only text people so much. I can only make so many podcast episodes and just not know if it's helping people or not. There's this feeling that I think all of us wrestle with. It's the reality of wanting to know that our lives have purpose. Purpose matters so much. It does have purpose. God created us and we should remember that. But at the same time, when we're stuck in, this, I call it a drywall cage of emotions. When we're stuck in this, it's hard to feel like we have purpose. And so that's something that I want us to be reminded of and be real about. And then, like I mentioned earlier, this just recently dealing with grief. That has been so hard, and not so much as hard for me as it is seeing my wife who just lost her mom walking through grief. And again, I'm going to dig into that in a moment, but that's what this episode's about. I want us to talk about these real things and pull out the pieces that help you or are important for where you're at in the season you are. Maybe you are walking through grief. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've lost someone because of this coronavirus, or maybe you've lost someone just because of um, just the season. They died of natural causes, or they had cancer, like my mother-in-law did. These are all real things. The world didn't stop when the coronavirus came. They're all things. Accidents happen. All that stuff is really heavy. And it's even heavier when you're stuck in your home and you don't feel like you can do what you need to do. And so it's important for us to talk about that. So for the past 2.5 years or so, my family had been walking through a diagnosis of cancer for my mother-in-law, and it was an incredibly difficult season when we found out that she had cancer. Um, as we walked through that, we learned a lot about what the Lord wanted us to see of family and the importance of being together and just spending time together and the love that we had for one another. And you know what? It's okay to be sad, or it's okay to walk through things. And that was a really, really important 2 years of our life, 2.5 years of our life. But in right about the time that the coronavirus hit, my mother-in-law got put into the hospital, and as you are well aware, many hospitals were on lockdown, and we were unable to be able to share in that time with her, to be able to go see her in the hospital because of restrictions and all those things, which made it incredibly difficult for my wife because she did not want her mom to be alone. When we stop and look at life, none of us want to be alone. None of us want to be isolated, and especially in our last season of life. But even at that time, we didn't know what was going to happen. Just fast forward in a couple of weeks, we found ourselves bringing my mother-in-law to our house and having hospice care come in, and we dealt with weeks to days left of her life as she entered our home. And I know this is heavy, and I know this is probably an emotional thing for many people because they've probably been there. But as we walk through that season, and it wasn't long, it was only about a week. As we walked through that, it just showed me the reality of how fragile life is, but also how short life is. And I think many of us walk through our lives and kind of forget about the things that other people are dealing with. And I know I have, and I'm confessing that to you, that for many people, I just didn't know. I didn't know what you've walked through when you dealt with cancer, or when you dealt with a diagnosis of, or whatever it may be. And this has really been a convicting season of life for me, because it reminds me that everyone has something, whether you are dealing with an illness, or you're dealing with mental health issues, whether it be an anxiety or depression. They're very, very emotional times. And so we walk through this season. My mother-in-law passes away, and then I have to watch my best friend in the world, my wife, struggling. I have to see her hurting and in agony, because she's never going to be able to pick up the phone and call her mom and ask her a recipe. She's never going to be able to get a hug from her again. She's never going to be able to call her when she's just struggling, and her mom say it's okay. And I say all that not so you feel sorry for us, but because it's a very real thing for many of you, and it's a very real thing for lots of people. And it's easy to get caught up in our own lives and forget. And so I know, again, this is heavy, but I believe it's important for us to talk about things like grief and talk about things like loss, because they're life. At some point, you're going to walk through a season of that, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a friend. We are going to deal with those things. And if we don't work through those emotions, we're going to send ourselves down a destructive path. And that leads to some of what I want to talk about in the next part. I want to talk about the fact that from that grief, we also felt the high stress of things. Okay, well, we can't have a funeral because of the COVID-19 stuff. We were unable to have a memorial service for her. Well, that's stressful. Well, then the financial side of things, courts are closed. We can't put her will into probate. That is hard things to deal with. We're trying to pay a mortgage. We're trying to pay medical bills. And I know many of you are in that, and you haven't even lost someone. You're trying to pay your mortgage. You're trying to pay your bills. You're doing all these things, but life is just kind of coming down on you. And it's these high pressure, high stress situations that brings out your anxiety, brings out your struggles, and you just feel so alone. And that's why we have to talk about it, because you feel so alone. This is true for anyone in any season. If you lost your job because of all this stuff, or you've lost your job, you're listening to this 2 years from now and everything's cleared up with this coronavirus, and you've lost your job, the same thing applies. Maybe you're walking through marriage troubles. Maybe it just feels like you guys don't know each other anymore, or maybe you're just fighting constantly and you're just tired of it. Maybe you have a rebellious teenager who's just really making you pull your hair out. The thing is that is real, and it can feel lonely. So I want us to understand that these are important pieces that affect us, and then we do things with them that we have to be very careful with. We can either embrace the good that can come from it as an opportunity, and I know, even living in it right now, it doesn't feel like an opportunity. Or we can shift and make it be something that is detrimental to our lives. Here are a couple of the ways that I have coped with this grieving season, this season of isolation, and I'm embarrassed to admit them, but I also feel like you need to understand that I get it. So if you've listened to the podcast or you've heard me talk in person, you know that something I've dealt with in my past was pornography, and for a season, I was bound to that, and I went through counseling, got help, and really broke free from it. It was amazing. But what I found out of that season was that in my emotions, that pornography was the thing. It was the thing that when I was struggling, when I was grieving, if you will, or when I was hurt by someone, my tendency was to medicate myself. And so that's what I did. I went and medicated myself through pornography. And as I broke free from that and I moved on with my life and did well in managing my emotions and those kind of things, then I slowly started to veer off and started dealing with emotional eating. One, I got older, so couldn't eat those ho-hos anymore like I used to. Anyway, but what I found, even in this season, we've had so many people bring us food. It's been incredible. So thankful. But when you're getting cake here, cookies there, Oreos here, whatever, when you're getting those things, you find yourself just overwhelmed. You're dealing with your emotions, and this temptation is in your house. And a lot of us have been in isolation, and I imagine that even being in isolation, you just find yourself walking into your pantry or opening the refrigerator. And again, I'm embarrassed to say that because here's something that I've realized about myself. I'm a consistently inconsistent person. And what that means is all it takes is something to throw me off my routine, something to shift me away from my focus, and I find myself breaking the routines and patterns I was in. When back in January, my wife and I jumped back on the Weight Watchers bandwagon. You've heard me talk about that in the past, and we decided, hey, we're gonna work hard to do this. Well, lost almost 20 pounds, and quarantine happens, which was already hard enough. And then we walked through all this stuff, losing my mother-in-law, and I haven't even jumped on the scale because, to be quite honest, I'm afraid. But all that being said, I think many of you could probably relate to that. You found yourself on a track, on a routine, and then life happens, or a quarantine happens, which you don't expect to happen, and you're like, "What do I do?" And then you start to veer off, and that's how it happens. It's usually not this hard left turn. You'll start eating a little later, or you'll start throwing in an ice cream before you go to bed, and then you wind up back where you started. And it's those destructive things that come out of the emotional things. Does that make sense? Comes out of the emotional things. So we have these emotional things that happen. We have these hard times, these high stress situations, these grieving moments. And then we find ourselves coming out of these emotional with these things that we need to do to manage dealing with them. And so then our anxiety comes out and pushes us toward them, and we medicate through it. And it can then cause depression. Then it can make you feel helpless. And then what do you think happens? The cycle starts over. You just start over. You go right back to where you start because you feel sorry about yourself feel sorry for yourself, and then you wind back up right where you started, emotionally eating, and there you are. Only talk about this because I know about it so well. It's what I tend to do, and I'm ashamed to say that, but I also need to confess it to you. I've already confessed it to the Lord, which I believe are incredibly important pieces to all of this. So that being said, these are the things that I think really we have to wrestle with, and we have to have a plan in place. We have to have some discipline in place to be able to protect ourselves when we are walking through emotional situations like grief, or high stress situations like financial troubles or loss of a job or marriage troubles, all those things I mentioned and more. And we have to be able to realize that without discipline, we're going to go down the wrong path. So I want us to talk about that. I want us to talk about the things that we need to put in place. What are the things that would help us in these situations? And I first want to talk about the grieving process. Don't ever let someone tell you that you can't grieve. Don't let anyone tell you that it's wrong for you to hurt or to feel pain for losing someone. And I want to pull out this point just for a second. Grieving is well, the grief I'm talking about is mostly when we've lost someone, but I also believe grieving is just the loss of something or someone. I don't believe it's limited to just someone dying. I think it's also, you lose your kids go off to college. You grieve that. It's the same type thing. And it's okay to grieve. We need to understand that whoever told us that it's wrong to feel hurt or to feel, and it's not so much hurt. Let me reiterate that. It to feel the pain of separation, to feel the reality that things aren't going to be the same. That's probably a better way to say it. Whoever told you that that's wrong, they're wrong, because this is life. Life is going to continue to have those things. You have emotions. God created emotions in us, and that is okay. The problem comes when we don't manage those emotions well, when we don't work through the emotions that we're feeling, when we don't process our grief well. And so, one, please understand, grieve. It is okay to grieve. I've watched my wife grieve, and I've grieved for her. And that is okay. I want her to grieve because she's sad. Those are real things. Those are hard things. God created us to have feelings, and that's okay to feel that. For you, it may be to do something to be able to share with someone else. That's the key. I think it's important to be disciplined enough to say, I can't do this alone. I need someone to walk with me. It's as simple as just saying, you know what? Will you pray for me right now? Because I don't want to pray. God isn't mad at you for feeling that way. You're hurt. God's a big God. Maybe it's walking through the financial stuff with someone else, because that's hard. You're trying to deal with your emotions and deal with responsibility at the same time. Walk with someone else. Grief in isolation is dangerous. I want to say that again. Grief in isolation is dangerous. And I'm not talking about quarantine isolation. I'm talking about isolation of the mind. It is a very dangerous thing. And something else that I think is important is to have trust in the Lord, and He'll bring us through it. He'll help us through it. And I know even in those situations, it's hard to really lean into that trust. But there's a passage of scripture that I want you to hear, and I'm going to read it for us. It's 1 Peter 5:10. After you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to His eternal glory in Christ, will Himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. After you have suffered a while. It doesn't say if you suffer a while. It says after you do. We're all going to walk through something in this life. Now, he's talking to the early church about the fact that they're being persecuted, but I believe the same thing applies today. If you walk through hard times, you will walk through hard times. And because of that, Christ will restore, He will confirm, He will strengthen, and He will establish you. So in your grief, hold true to that passage, 1 Peter 5:10, and those four things. He will restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. The next thing that we need to do to be disciplined through our grief and our high stress is determine how we medicate ourselves. So you could take good medicine, right? You can take Tylenol when you have a headache, or you could take something really bad that is going to hurt you in the process. And that's the thing. It's okay to medicate ourselves, but medicate ourselves with the right things. I know that seems weird. It even sounds weird coming out of my mouth. But if we medicate ourselves with the Lord, we medicate ourselves with community, medicate ourselves with purpose and trust, good things come. But if we medicate ourselves with bad things like emotional eating, then we're going to find ourselves going down a dangerous road. That being said, maybe you need to put some boundaries in place. What is the thing you're medicating with? Okay, for me, I emotionally eat. So I walk downstairs, I go to the pantry. The pantry looks like heaven with all this stuff. So what I've had to do is literally take a trash bag and throw stuff away. My wife doesn't like it, but you know what? Sometimes we got to do that. Sometimes we have to put those boundaries in place because I know if it's in my house, I will be tempted by it. Maybe we put certain disciplines in place like, okay, this time to this time, I will not eat. I'm going to fast. I'm going to fast. I'm going to say, Lord, I trust you to help me get through these next 2 hours before I go to bed. So I don't eat a bag of chips and a bowl of ice cream. I have not done that. Just saying. But maybe those boundaries are important for you to have discipline in your life, that when you're walking through hard things, high stress situations, that you can have some structure that'll help you. And then the next thing is choose one thing. Choose one thing that'll bring structure to your life. So maybe everything around you feels like chaos. I talked about this in the last episode, but maybe you just need to pick a time to go to bed every night. Maybe you need to have structure and say, I'm going to go to bed at 10:30 every night. It helps bring stability when you're struggling. Maybe your one thing is, I'm not going to eat out this week. Just that. Or how about this? I'm not going to get on social media today. Try that. It's pretty hard, actually. Your finger just kind of finds itself clicking Facebook. I will scroll through my phone and then I just, out of nowhere, Facebook or Instagram pops up because I've conditioned myself to medicate myself through it. And the same thing applies here. Maybe you need to have one thing that will bring structure to your life. So whether you're grieving today, maybe you're grieving the loss of a loved one like we are. Or maybe you're grieving the loss of a job or a marriage. Or maybe you're in a high stress situation where your finances are incredibly tight. Please know that you're not alone. Please know that life is going to be hard, but the Lord is going to restore you. He's going to confirm. He's going to strengthen you. He's going to establish you. But we won't see those things if we don't lean into Him, and we won't see those things if we don't lean into one another. So again, it's okay to grieve. Do it with someone. Trust the Lord. Know that He's going to do those things in your life. Determine what is the thing that you're using to medicate yourself. Is it a good medicine or a bad medicine? And then again, what's the one thing you're going to do that's going to bring structure to your day and to your life in this season? So as we wrap up this episode, I, again, hope this is helpful. God has created community for the reason of doing these things together. He said it's not good to be alone. And I love that. It's a reminder to me that God wants me to walk with someone through these trials. So if you wouldn't mind, jump over to theanxiouspastor.com. Get on our mailing list, check out the blog that gets put out every other week, and then hit the subscribe button, whether you're on YouTube or on iTunes. Well, I guess it's not iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Just subscribe and share it with your friends and family. I want this to be a help to so many people. We do that by being real, living authentic. So let's get trying.